In the November 7th election, voters will choose new city councilors for 3 seats being left open. One of these is for District 1, currently represented by Sal Lamatina. The district includes East Boston, Charlestown, and the North End Waterfront. We'd like to welcome one of the finalists, a candidate from East Boston, Lydia Edwards. Thank you very much for being with us again.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, talk about your background, because you've been an attorney, but the one thing you seem to stress even more is community organizing. You say it's like being on the council. So how is it like that?
Well, I think, if at anything, this political position is as close to grassroots as you're going to get. You're going to learn about the day-to-day concerns, from potholes to schools to whether folks are feeling that they're living in a city they can afford. You're going to hear about it first. And part of being a community organizer is taking the initiatives, the concerns of the community, representing them, and also turning them into real solutions with the community's guidance. And I think that that's exactly what a city councilor should be doing, especially when we're dealing with all sorts of different issues. I think, if at anything, as long as we're guided by the community and we are supported by them too and empowering them, I think together we'll be able to get so many things done.
You even talk about this as something you learned from the community. Was there somebody out there who really showed you a lot and helped you?
Well, I mean, I you can look at all sorts of different leaders in the community, our teachers, our coaches. You can look at a lot of folks who are already in positions of community organizing. I learned it from, organizing domestic workers and some of the people who've been able to get things done in or outside of government positions, regardless of the title. Just even with our soup kitchen in East Boston, being able to feed folks every week, that to me is learning how to be effective through community. And I'm really inspired by that.
Well, one area where there was a difference between you and the other finalists, at least before this point, and that was over the additional tenant protections recently approved by the City Council. What should people take away from that?
Well, what was it? I think we want to be clear about what was actually approved. I think people are still confused about what the Jim Brooks Act does. It does 2 things now. It informs tenants about their rights. If they're facing an eviction, it doesn't add any rights to them. And then the second thing it does is protects folks who are homeowners. If they're in foreclosure, they've lost their home and the bank is their current landlord, as long as they pay a reasonable rent to the bank, they can stay in the home. All the just causes, all the things in between, all of that stuff is no longer part of the bill. So if anything, it demonstrates a real difference. This bill protects normal people from speculative landlords and normal people from banks. I'm happy to stand with that bill. I don't know why my opponent doesn't agree with that.
In this district, already we've heard about some of the problems with short-term rentals, both in terms of market pressure and quality of life. What would you like to see done about that?
I would love to see a couple things. I think we need to move beyond the question of whether we're going to tax Airbnb or short-term rentals to really regulating them to only people who live in the building, so owner-occupied buildings or apartments, and then also only allowing 1 unit in addition to the owner's unit to actually have the short-term rentals, limiting how long and how many short-term rentals you can have in a year, and then also making sure there's a registry. We just really want accountability. We don't want people running mini hotels from California. We want people who are here, who can be held accountable, who can clean up their properties, being able to be accessible by the city and by their neighbors.
This has been News, and we're talking with Lydia Edwards, candidate for City Councilor in District 1. Lydia, this district is also struggling with growth in the city right now, economic and housing construction, and part of that is in Charlestown, where there are plans to redevelop the public housing development and enlarge it with a mix of market housing. People in Charlestown are worried about being able to handle that. What do you think should be done?
Listen, I think that at the end of the day, everyone wants something to be done. Knocked on the doors. We've been in the BHA housing. Something needs to happen. The plan that was originally proposed was too big. It was not community driven or led, and I think it really has not been justified, the 2-to-1 ratio for market rate to affordable. So I will just put that out there, that I think the plan, they're going back to redo the plan, and I think that's a good thing. I hope the process that they go through also is changed, that they really start from the grassroots and meeting with as many groups as possible, starting with the folks who live in BHA housing and making sure that they feel that they can stay here and figure out what would make a real home for them. And then finally, I want to make sure that in this new process, we're really looking at how we're going to build pathways out of poverty. I don't want 40 years from now folks who are on Section 8 and in affordable units still being on those same units. I don't know why we aren't looking at rent to own that would help people who can't afford market but maybe too rich for the deeply affordable units to be able to get on the pathway to also home ownership. I think that's the real movement now with city-owned properties, is how we're going to make them livable and how people can begin to own those properties, and of course then their own future.
Well, there's also an expectation of some kind of growth and redevelopment at the current site of Suffolk Downs.
Yes.
It could even be the second headquarters for Amazon.com.
Yes.
Lots of jobs, but lots of housing pressure in the market and traffic. So what about this?
Again, I think it comes back to process. I've seen the bid, or people are seeing the bid after the fact. I would really love for us to be, East Boston especially, to be at the table from the very beginning, setting the standards for what it means to build an industry in Suffolk Downs, and making sure that the company or companies or whoever is going to go there knows that in order to move into East Boston, these are certain things that matter to the community, and to meet the community where we are, and to meet those standards. We just don't want folks making decisions and pre-planning and then coming to the community at a neighborhood association meeting with already a pre-planned and somewhat pre-approved idea. We want to know that we're part of helping to create a good future for East Boston. That's all. And that would include looking at traffic, looking at Belle Isle Marsh, making sure that there are also mitigation funds for affordable housing. There's so many things we want, and I think a good neighbor could help bring to the table.
Well, you have a traffic headache coming a little sooner than expected with the closing of the North Washington Street Bridge, and that affects the North End big time. So,
North End and Charlestown.
What about handling?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there was already a hole in the bridge as well, and so we had to shut that down temporarily earlier this week. So I think, again, we're talking about accountability and planning. The city needs to be able to plan, and one thing we want to do is keep cars moving in as much as we have them on the bridges now. And I think we need to have police detail. We need to have them out there regularly, and I would love to have the developers and construction companies help to pay for those details and making sure that they stay, of course, according to their own timeline. So I think we want to make sure that the police are out there, that we're moving cars, but we're also looking at alternative forms of travel, an Inner Harbor ferry, making sure that we actually are getting less cars on the bridge. We want the bridge to be sound and safe and walkable, but at the same time, in the construction, we want transparency. We want to know what's going to start, when it's going to stop, and people shouldn't be guessing or wondering when this is going to happen.
In this race, we have two candidates who've worked for the mayor. He said nice things about both of you, but there were flyers going around with a picture of your competitor with the mayor, and the mayor says he authorized that. There's another bunch of flyers going around with a picture of the mayor and you, and he says, well, that wasn't authorized. So what should people conclude from that?
Well, let's just set the record straight. My opponent has flyers that were approved by the mayor and himself with a tacit possible endorsement. I have not produced, designed, or neither has my campaign or distributed any flyer with myself and the mayor on that. And then in terms of making of the whole thing, I don't. People can continue to ask the mayor and my opponent about what that flyer means. I'm going to be focused on the voters and making sure that they're very clear that in me they have an independent voice that is only concerned about their endorsement of me and their support, and making sure that they feel that I'm accessible and that I will only be beholden to them.
Thank you very much for being with us. Lydia Edwards, candidate for City Council in District 1.